Ethan Cole was 36 years old when he became CEO of the tech company he and his wife had built from nothing in their cramped studio apartment 8 years ago. And the first thing he did that morning was serve her divorce papers in the kitchen they'd renovated together last spring. "Sign these," Ethan said, adjusting his navy suit jacket with the same casual confidence he'd used in yesterday's board meeting. The morning light streaming through their floor-to-ceiling windows caught the edges of the documents he'd just slid across their marble dining table. "My lawyer says we can wrap this up cleanly in 90 days. No drama, no mess." Lena sat frozen in her chair, still wearing the comfortable clothes she'd thrown on to make his celebration breakfast. The coffee she'd brewed, his favorite dark roast from that little shop in Pike Place they discovered on their honeymoon, sat untouched in front of him. Her eyes moved slowly from his face to the papers, then back again, searching for some sign that this was a cruel joke. "What is this?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Dissolution of marriage paperwork." Ethan's tone was measured, clinical. The same voice he'd used an hour ago on a conference call with investors. He remained standing, one hand resting casually on the back of the chair across from her, maintaining the physical distance that matched the emotional chasm he'd apparently been building for months. "I've already signed my portion. You just need to initial pages 3, 7, and 12, then sign the last page." 8 years of marriage reduced to 3 initials and a signature. Lena's hands trembled as she pulled the document closer. The legal terminology swam before her eyes. Petitioner, respondent, irreconcilable differences, equitable distribution. Words that felt like they belonged to other people's tragedies, not hers. "Ethan, I don't understand." She looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger in her husband's face. When had his eyes become so cold? "You just became CEO yesterday. We were supposed to celebrate tonight. I made reservations at." "Cancel them." He checked his watch, a new Rolex she hadn't seen before. "Lena, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You'll be taken care of. The settlement is generous. You keep the Volvo, you'll get the condo in Kirkland, and there's a lump sum that should more than cover your transition." My accountant broke it all down on page 9. "Should more than cover your transition." Like she was an employee being laid off with severance. "Why now?" The question came out stronger than she felt. Lena set the papers down, her fingers pressing flat against the cold marble. "Why wait until the day after you become CEO?" Ethan exhaled, the kind of patient sigh he reserved for explaining obvious things to people who weren't keeping up. "Because I've outgrown this marriage." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and precise as a scalpel. "Outgrown." Lena repeated the word slowly, testing its weight. "Like I'm a phase you've moved past?" "I didn't mean it like that." But his tone suggested he meant exactly that. He finally pulled out the chair and sat, but only perched on the edge, ready to leave. "Look, when we started the company, we were kids with a dream. You were exactly what I needed then, supportive, understanding, willing to eat ramen while we poured everything into the business." "What we poured into the business," Lena corrected quietly. Ethan continued as if she hadn't spoken. "But I'm in a different position now. The board, the investors, the media, they expect a certain image. I need a partner who fits that world. Someone who can navigate corporate galas and investor dinners without needing me to explain every reference." Each word was a small knife. Lena felt them all. "I built that company with you," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Every line of code in the original platform, every late night, every pitch to investors when we had nothing but a PowerPoint and hope. And you'll be compensated for your contributions." Ethan stood again, smoothing his suit. "That's what the settlement is for. Be reasonable, Lena. We had a good run. Let's end it with dignity." Dignity. He wanted to talk about dignity while he stood over her in his expensive suit, in their kitchen, treating their marriage like a bad investment he was liquidating. "What if I don't sign?" Lena asked quietly. For the first time that morning, something flickered across Ethan's face. Annoyance, maybe impatience. "Then you make this difficult for both of us. My lawyers are very good, and they're very expensive. You'll sign eventually, but you'll spend whatever settlement you get on your own legal fees first." He picked up his briefcase from the counter. "I'm staying at the Fairmont for now. Have your decision to me by Friday." He walked toward the door, his leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floor they'd chosen together at that sustainable timber company in Fremont. "Ethan," Lena called after him. He paused, hand on the doorframe, but didn't turn around. "You're making a mistake." He did turn then, and his smile was the saddest thing she'd seen all morning. Not sad for her, but sad for her naivety. The smile of someone who'd already won and couldn't understand why the loser wouldn't accept defeat gracefully. "No, Lena, marrying you was the mistake. I'm just correcting it now." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Lena sat alone in their kitchen, in the home they'd built, staring at divorce papers that promised her 90 days to dismantle a life. The morning light that had seemed so bright when she woke up now felt harsh and exposing. What Ethan didn't know, what he was about to discover in the most devastating way possible, was that the woman he'd just discarded like outdated software knew exactly what he'd built, exactly how he'd built it, and exactly where every weakness in a shining new empire was hidden. But that reckoning was still weeks away. For now, Lena sat in the silence of their kitchen, her cold coffee forgotten, the divorce papers untouched, and something new crystallizing in her chest. Not heartbreak, not anymore. Something far more dangerous. Clarity. After Ethan left, Lena sat motionless at the dining table for what might have been minutes or hours. Time felt strange, elastic. Her eyes drifted to the coffee maker on the counter, and suddenly she was 23 again, standing in their first apartment. It was a studio in Capitol Hill that smelled like the Thai restaurant downstairs. They'd had one laptop between them, a futon that doubled as their couch, and a dream that most people called delusional. Ethan would code until 3 in the morning while Lena handled the business side, cold calling potential investors, drafting pitch decks, learning terms like burn rate and equity distribution from YouTube videos because neither of them could afford business school. "We're going to change everything," Ethan had whispered one night, his head resting on her shoulder as they sat on that futon, both too wired from caffeine and ambition to sleep. "You and me against the world, Lena." Always had lasted exactly 8 years, 3 months, and 17 days. Lena pulled the divorce papers closer now, forcing herself to read through the legal language with the same attention to detail she'd once applied to their first investor contracts. Page 3 outlined the division of their shared assets. The primary residence, this house they'd bought 2 years ago, would go to Ethan. She'd received the condo in Kirkland, the one they'd purchased as a rental property that had never quite generated the income they'd projected. Fair market value, approximately 40% of what this house was worth. Page 7 detailed her settlement, a lump sum of $280,000. It sounded like a fortune until you did the math. Divided by the 8 years she'd poured into building Cole Technologies, it worked out to $35,000 per year, less than what they paid their junior developers. Page 12 addressed company shares. This section was shorter than she'd expected. Just 3 lines that essentially said she'd retain no equity in the company. Technically accurate, since Ethan had bought out her shares 3 years ago during a restructuring. Just for tax purposes, he'd assured her then. "You're still a founder. That never changes." Except now it had changed. On paper, officially, she was nobody. Just another ex-wife with a settlement check and an NDA buried somewhere in subsection 4C. The memories kept coming, relentless. She remembered the investor meeting in San Francisco where Ethan had frozen up during the pitch. His voice had cracked, his hands had trembled, and Lena had smoothly taken over, answering every technical question, every market analysis query, every concern about scalability and monetization. They'd walked out with $2.3 million in seed funding. On the flight home, Ethan had held her hand and said, "I couldn't do this without you. You know that, right?" She remembered the product launch that almost destroyed them. A critical bug had surfaced 48 hours before their scheduled demo to enterprise clients. Lena had stayed up for 60 straight hours, surviving on cold pizza and determination, rewriting code until her vision blurred and her fingers ached. The launch had been flawless. Ethan had kissed her forehead in the office they shared and said, "You saved us. You always save us." She remembered the vacations they'd planned but never taken. The Amalfi Coast trip that got canceled for a board meeting. The anniversary weekend in Vancouver that got postponed for an acquisition negotiation. The simple Sunday brunches that gradually disappear because Ethan was always too busy, always too focused, always chasing the next milestone. Once we hit our targets, he'd promise. Once we establish market dominance. Once we go public, then we'll have time for us. The targets kept moving. The time never came. Lena's phone buzzed against the table. A text from Ethan. My assistant will coordinate pickup times for my belongings. Please be flexible. Her schedule is tight. Not our assistant. Not even a please that sounded genuine. Just another task to delegate. Another loose end to tie up efficiently. She set the phone down and returned to the papers. The deadline Ethan had set jumped out at her. 90 days. 3 months to dismantle what they'd spent 8 years building. The math felt obscene. Her lawyer. Well, she'd need a lawyer now, wouldn't she? Would probably tell her the settlement was reasonable. Maybe even generous by divorce standards. The house in Kirkland was in a good neighborhood. The cash would cover her expenses while she figured out her next move. She should feel grateful. You should be grateful, Ethan's voice echoed in her mind. That's what he'd implied this morning, wasn't it? That she should thank him for his dismissive generosity. Lena stood finally, her legs stiff from sitting too long. She walked to the window that overlooked their backyard. They'd planted those cherry trees together last spring. Ethan had insisted on doing it themselves instead of hiring landscapers because he wanted it to be meaningful. She'd laughed as he'd struggled with the shovel, getting dirt on his designer jeans. That version of Ethan felt like someone from a different lifetime. Her reflection stared back at her from the window glass. She looked tired, older than 31, but her eyes weren't filled with tears anymore. That initial shock had burned off, leaving something else in its place. The divorce papers promised her 90 days of certainty. Ethan would get his clean break. She would get her settlement. Everyone would move on with minimal disruption to his ascent. Except Lena knew something Ethan seemed to have forgotten in his rush toward his polished corporate future. She knew where the company had come from. She knew which code was hers and which was his. She knew which investor relationships she'd cultivated and which contracts she'd negotiated. She knew exactly how many of his achievements had her fingerprints all over them. Most importantly, she knew something he'd never bothered to question because he'd stopped seeing her as a partner years ago. She was smarter than him. She'd always been smarter than him. He'd just been too ambitious and too arrogant to notice. Lena picked up her phone and opened her contacts. She scrolled past friends and family until she found the name she was looking for. Rachel Chun, the attorney who'd helped them navigate their first major contract dispute 4 years ago. Sharp, ruthless, and expensive. Before she could second-guess herself, Lena typed out a message. Need to discuss divorce representation. Client has resources and isn't interested in fair. Interested in winning. The reply came back in less than 2 minutes. My office. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Bring everything. Lena set the phone down and looked at the divorce papers one final time. Ethan wanted 90 days. He wanted efficiency. He wanted her signature on pages 3, 7, and 12 so he could move forward with his new life, his new image, his new version of success that apparently didn't include the woman who'd helped him build it all. She picked up a pen, but instead of signing, she wrote 3 words across the front page in bold letters. Not this time. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, she would sleep in the house they'd bought together, in the bed they'd shared, and she would let herself feel everything Ethan thought she was too weak to survive. Because what he didn't understand, what he was about to learn the hard way, was that the same determination that had built Cole Technologies could just as easily tear it down. And Lena had nothing but time, clarity, and 90 days to show him exactly what he'd thrown away. The announcement went live at 9 a.m. sharp on Monday. Cole Technologies names Ethan Cole AS CEO. The headline blazed across TechCrunch, VentureBeat, and the Seattle Times business section. The press release was masterfully crafted, highlighting Ethan's visionary leadership and his instrumental role in transforming a startup into an industry leader. The professional photo showed him in that same navy suit, standing confidently in their downtown office with the Seattle skyline gleaming behind him. Lena's name appeared nowhere in the announcement, not even in the company history paragraph. By noon, Ethan's LinkedIn profile had exploded with congratulations. Former colleagues, industry leaders, and people he'd never mentioned to Lena were suddenly his closest allies. Well deserved, they wrote. The perfect choice. Can't wait to see where you take the company. Lena scrolled through the comments from her laptop in the Kirkland condo, the one she'd apparently be living in permanently soon. Each congratulatory message felt like watching someone applaud at her own funeral. The media coverage continued through the week. On Tuesday, Ethan appeared on a local business podcast discussing the future of tech leadership. He spoke eloquently about innovation, disruption, and the importance of adaptability. When the host asked about his journey, Ethan's carefully rehearsed story began in their cramped studio apartment, but somehow ended with singular pronouns. I knew from day one that I wanted to build something that mattered, he said, his voice carrying that practice humility successful CEOs perfect. The early years were brutal. 18-hour days, ramen for dinner, sleeping under my desk. But I believed in the vision. I. Never we. On Wednesday, the company held an all-hands meeting to officially introduce CEO Ethan Cole. Lena wasn't invited, naturally, but Maya Chun, her former assistant who'd quietly stayed loyal, sent her a detailed text afterward. He was incredible, confident, inspiring. Announced new initiatives, restructuring. People ate it up. Afterward, someone asked about you. He said you were exploring personal opportunities and wished you well. Said it so smoothly, like you'd chosen to leave. Nobody questioned it. Lena read the message twice, her jaw tight. Exploring personal opportunities. Corporate speak for she doesn't matter anymore. By Thursday, the internal reshuffling was complete. An email blast announced the new leadership structure. VP of Engineering, promoted from within. Chief Product Officer, external hire from Amazon. Director of Strategic Partnerships, someone Lena had never heard of, but who apparently had extensive industry experience. Every position Lena had once influenced, every meeting she'd once attended, every decision she'd once shaped, reassigned, redistributed, erased. The company was moving forward without her, and Ethan was making sure everyone knew it. On Friday afternoon, Ethan called her. The first time they'd spoken since Monday morning's kitchen confrontation. Just checking in, he said, his tone professionally pleasant, like they were distant acquaintances catching up. Making sure you've had time to review the settlement terms. My lawyers are standing by when you're ready to proceed. I'm still reviewing, Lena replied carefully. Don't overthink it, Lena. She could hear him walking, probably between meetings in that corner office he'd had renovated last month. The terms are fair. More than fair. Actually, Rachel Chun is a good attorney, but she'll tell you the same thing. Take the settlement, start fresh. You deserve that. You deserve that. Like he was doing her favor. Like she should be grateful for his generosity in dismantling their marriage efficiently. I'll let you know, Lena said. Don't take too long. A pause, then his voice sharpened slightly. The company's moving fast right now. New investors are interested. Potential acquisition conversations are starting. Clean, personal situations make these things smoother. I'm sure you understand. There it was. The real message underneath the pleasant veneer. Don't become a problem. Don't slow down my momentum. Disappear quietly. I understand perfectly, Lena said, and ended the call. She sat in the condo's small home office. Nothing like the dedicated workspace they'd shared in their house. Surrounded by boxes she'd been unpacking for the past 3 days. But she wasn't unpacking anymore. She was organizing. The dining table had transformed into a command center. Her laptop sat open to multiple browser tabs. Archived emails, shared drive documents, investor correspondence, product development timelines. On her left, a stack of printed contracts dating back 6 years. On her right, a legal pad covered in notes, connections, and questions written in her precise handwriting. To anyone watching through the window, she might have looked like a woman drowning in paperwork, desperately trying to understand what had happened to her life. Exactly what Ethan assumed she was doing. But Lena wasn't drowning. She was diving. Every company has secrets. Not illegal ones, necessarily, but uncomfortable truths that look better left buried. Decisions made quickly that wouldn't survive scrutiny. promises made to early investors that didn't quite align with current practices, partnerships built on relationships rather than merit, code inherited from acquisitions that never got properly vetted. Lena had helped build this company from nothing. She'd been in every early meeting, every late-night strategy session, every crisis management scramble. She knew where the foundation was solid and where it was just carefully arranged facade. And she was starting to remember things Ethan had probably forgotten he'd told her. Like the patent application they'd filed in year 2 that had Lena's technical specifications, but only Ethan's name on the final paperwork. Just cleaner for future fundraising, he'd explained then. She'd trusted him. Like the investor who'd committed $5 million based specifically on Lena's presentation about their proprietary algorithm. The same algorithm that now powered 60% of their core product. The same investor who probably didn't know Lena no longer had any stake in the company. Like the acquisition of TechStart Solutions 3 years ago, where Lena had personally conducted the technical due diligence and discovered code vulnerabilities that should have killed the deal. But Ethan had wanted the acquisition for the press coverage, so they'd buried her concerns and moved forward. That vulnerable code was still running in their production environment. Rachel Chun had told her during their Tuesday meeting, "Divorce is war disguised as paperwork. Your ex wants you to sign quickly because confident people make mistakes. They assume victory before the battle's over." Lena pulled up an email from February 2019. A conversation between her and Ethan about equity distribution for a potential new hire. In that email chain, Ethan had written, "Your technical leadership is the backbone of this company. Without you, we're just another SaaS startup with good marketing." She took a screenshot, added it to a folder labeled Foundation. Outside, the sun was setting over Lake Washington. Somewhere across the water, in their downtown office, Ethan was probably celebrating his first week as CEO. Maybe drinks with the executive team. Maybe an interview with another tech publication. Maybe dinner with whoever would fit better into his new corporate image. He was ascending, momentum building, power consolidating. To everyone watching, Ethan Cole was the perfect success story. The brilliant founder who'd built an empire and was now positioned to take it even further. And Lena? She was the footnote he'd already written out of the story. The ex-wife quietly accepting her settlement, fading into irrelevance while he claimed the spotlight. At least, that's what he thought. Lena opened a new document on her laptop and titled it, Timeline of Contributions, 2017 to 2025. Then she began typing, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the same focused intensity she'd once applied to building their company. Ethan had made a critical mistake. He'd assumed that love was the only thing binding them together. That without it, she'd simply drift away. But he'd forgotten something important. Lena didn't just love him. She'd built him, and she remembered exactly how. The file was labeled Board Documents, 2019 Governance Review. Lena found it at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, buried 3 folders deep in their shared company drive that Ethan apparently hadn't bothered to revoke her access to yet. Another mistake in a growing list. She opened the PDF and began reading, her coffee long cold beside her laptop. Page after page of corporate governance policies, the kind of dense legal language most people skimmed through on their way to the signature line. But Lena had never been most people. She'd been the one who'd insisted they create these policies in the first place. It was late 2019, and Cole Technologies was raising their Series C round. The lead investor, Meridian Ventures, had expressed concerns about founder control and long-term stability. "We've seen too many promising companies destroyed by internal conflict," their senior partner had said during a tense conference call. "We need structural protections." Ethan had wanted to push back. "They're trying to dilute our control," he'd argued after the call, pacing their office. "We can't let investors dictate how we run our company." But Lena had understood what Meridian was really asking for. Not control, assurance. They were about to invest $15 million. They needed to believe the founders wouldn't implode. "Let me handle it," she told Ethan. "I'll draft something that protects us and satisfies them." She'd spent 2 weeks working with their corporate attorney, crafting governance policies that looked standard but contained specific protections. Ethan had reviewed the final document for maybe 10 minutes before signing. "You always handle this stuff better than me," he'd said, kissing her forehead. "I trust you completely." That trust, that blind, absolute trust, was about to cost him everything. Lena's eyes found Section 7.3, Leadership Conduct Standards. She read it once, then twice, then a third time to be certain. Any C-suite executive or board member who engages in conduct that materially affects company stability, including but not limited to undisclosed conflicts of interest, failure to maintain fiduciary duties, or actions that compromise operational continuity, shall be subject to immediate review by the Board Ethics Committee. Material personal matters affecting leadership stability must be disclosed within 30 days of occurrence. Subsection B was even more specific. For purposes of operational continuity, material personal matters include divorce, separation, or material change in circumstances involving founding members or their immediate family. The affected party must recuse themselves from major strategic decisions during the disclosure period pending ethics review. Ethan had filed for divorce 8 days ago. He'd informed the board. Never. Instead, he'd pushed through a major restructuring, approved 3 new executive hires, and initiated preliminary acquisition discussions with 2 potential targets. All without disclosing his material personal matter. All in direct violation of governance policies he'd signed, but never actually read. Lena took a screenshot, added it to her growing evidence folder. But that wasn't the most interesting part. She scrolled to Section 9.1, Intellectual Property Protections. This section she drafted personally after a particularly brutal negotiation with an investor who tried to claim ownership of their core algorithm. All proprietary technology, algorithms, and trade secrets developed by founding members retain attribution rights regardless of equity structure. Attribution rights include documentation of original authorship and cannot be retroactively modified without written consent of all original developers. Lena opened another file, the patent application for their flagship product's recommendation engine, the one generating $40 million in annual revenue. The technical specifications had her name all over them, literally. Her digital signature, her technical documentation, her optimization methods. But the final patent filing listed only Ethan Cole as inventor. For simplicity, he'd said 3 years ago during that restructuring, "You know, it's really ours. This is just paperwork." Except patents weren't just paperwork. They were legal proof of invention. And according to Section 9.1, he needed her written consent to remove her attribution. Consent she'd never given. She added this to the evidence folder, labeled it IP violations. The documents kept revealing themselves, one after another, like pulling a thread that unraveled an entire tapestry. There was the investor agreement from 2020 where Ethan had personally guaranteed that both founders would remain actively involved in strategic decisions through 2025. But Lena had been systematically excluded from strategy meetings for the past 14 months. She had email proof. Meeting invites suddenly stopped, including her in March 2024. There was the equity buyout from 2022 that Ethan had framed as tax optimization, but was actually sold to investors as consolidating founder control for faster decision-making. The investor deck, which she found in another forgotten shared folder, specifically mentioned both founders maintaining active roles. Removing one founder without disclosure could be considered material misrepresentation. There was even an email chain from last month where Ethan had approved a $3 million marketing spend without full board vote, claiming founder authority. Except according to their bylaws Lena had written, expenditures over $2 million required board approval when initiated by a single executive. Each document was a small violation, a minor governance oversight, the kind of thing that might get explained away individually. But together, they painted a picture of a CEO who'd become reckless, who'd stop following the rules the moment he'd gained power, who believed his new position made him untouchable. Lena created a new spreadsheet, governance timeline. In one column, she listed every policy violation with dates and documentation. In the second column, She listed the potential consequences according to their corporate bylaws. In the third column, she noted which board members would care most about each specific violation. Rachel Chun had told her during their last meeting, "Corporate law is like chess. The winner isn't who makes the boldest move. It's who sees the board most clearly." Ethan was playing checkers. He'd assumed his CEO title made him invincible, that his media coverage proved his worth, that Lena's silence meant surrender. He'd never considered that she might be studying the entire board. At 4:15 a.m., Lena closed her laptop. Outside, Seattle was still dark, the city quiet except for the occasional car passing on the street below. In a few hours, Ethan would wake up in his Fairmont suite, put on another expensive suit, and continue building his empire. He'd assume Lena was still reviewing the divorce papers, still trying to understand legal terminology, still processing her heartbreak. He'd be wrong on all counts. Lena stood and walked to the condo's small balcony. The cold November air felt sharp and clarifying. Somewhere across the water, in that downtown office tower, sat a company she'd helped build. A company that bore only Ethan's name now, but ran on systems she designed, contracts she'd negotiated, and policies she'd written specifically to prevent exactly what Ethan was currently doing. The heartbreak she'd felt 8 days ago had transformed completely. It wasn't gone. Grief like that didn't vanish overnight. But it had crystallized into something far more useful. Clarity, strategy, purpose. Ethan wanted 90 days. He wanted her signature. He wanted her silence. What he was about to get was a masterclass in consequences. The Cole Technologies boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Columbia Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. On clear days like this one, you could see all the way to the San Juan Islands. Ethan had specifically requested this space for his first official board meeting as CEO. The symbolism mattered. The view, the height, the undeniable evidence of how far he'd climbed. By 9:55 a.m., everyone had arrived. The 7 board members sat around the custom walnut conference table, each with their leather portfolio and imported water. David Chun from Meridian Ventures, their largest institutional investor. Susan Park from Tech Forward Capital. Robert Mitchell, the independent director they brought on during Series B. The others, industry veterans, early believers, people whose approval Ethan had spent years cultivating. His executive team flanked the table. The new VP of engineering, the chief product officer from Amazon, the CFO who'd helped them prepare for their eventual IPO. Behind them sat legal counsel, 2 attorneys from Preston and Gray, the firm that handled their corporate matters. The room hummed with expensive confidence. Ethan stood at the head of the table in a charcoal Tom Ford suit that cost more than their first month's rent in that Capitol Hill studio. He looked every inch the CEO, polished, prepared, powerful. Exactly the image he'd been building toward. "Thank you all for being here," Ethan began, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "This is an exciting time for Cole Technologies. As your newly appointed CEO, I want to outline our strategic vision for the next 18 months. He clicked to his first slide, a growth projection that curved sharply upward. Revenue targets, market expansion, potential acquisition opportunities. The numbers were aggressive but achievable. The kind of ambitious vision boards love to see. Our Q4 performance exceeded expectations by 17%, Ethan continued. Early indicators for Q1 show similar momentum. We're positioned to dominate our vertical while expanding into adjacent markets. The restructuring I've implemented over the past 2 weeks has already increased operational efficiency by... The boardroom door opened. The sound was subtle, just the soft click of the latch, the whisper of hinges, but in that moment of interruption, it might as well have been a gunshot. Every head turned. Lena stepped into the room. She wore a navy suit that mirrored Ethan's in color, but surpassed it in precision. Her hair was pulled back simply, her minimal makeup highlighting rather than hiding. She carried a leather portfolio identical to those already on the table and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Behind her, Ethan's assistant hovered in the doorway, her expression panicked. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Cole," I told her this was a closed meeting, but she insisted. It's fine, Michelle, Lena said calmly, not breaking stride. I'm a shareholder. I have every right to attend board meetings. The murmurs started immediately. Board members exchanged glances. The legal counsel leaned together, whispering. Susan Park's eyebrows rose with unmistakable interest. Lena. Ethan's voice had lost its smooth cadence. He stood frozen at the head of the table, his presentation remote still in hand, his carefully constructed momentum suddenly derailed. What are you doing here? Attending a board meeting. Lena took a seat in one of the open chairs along the wall. Not at the table itself, but clearly within the meeting space. She set her portfolio on her lap and met Ethan's gaze with an expression of polite professionalism. Please, continue your presentation. I'm here to observe. You're not a... Ethan stopped himself, his jaw tightening. The room was watching. He couldn't afford to look rattled. You don't have board privileges. No, Lena agreed. But as you mentioned in your divorce filing, I do retain certain shareholder rights from the 2022 restructuring. Section 4.7 of our corporate bylaws states that any shareholder with documented contributions to company founding and development may attend board meetings in an observational capacity. She paused. I helped write those bylaws. Did you forget? David Chun cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a brief recess, too. That won't be necessary, Lena said smoothly. She looked directly at Chun, then at each board member in turn. I'm not here to disrupt. I'm here because I believe there are matters this board should be aware of. Matters that affect your fiduciary responsibilities and the company's governance compliance. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan's face had gone carefully blank, but Lena knew that expression. She'd seen it before, years ago, when an investor had caught him in an inconsistency during a pitch. It was the look of someone rapidly calculating their next move while pretending to remain in control. I'm not sure this is the appropriate venue for personal grievances, Ethan said, his voice regaining some of its corporate smoothness. If you have concerns about our divorce settlement, my attorneys are available to. This isn't about the divorce, Lena interrupted gently. Well, not primarily. This is about governance violations, undisclosed material events, and potential misrepresentation to investors. She opened her portfolio, revealing the first page of her meticulously organized documentation. I have evidence that should concern every person in this room. Robert Mitchell, the independent director, leaned forward. What kind of evidence? Lena smiled, not triumphantly, not angrily, just with the calm assurance of someone who'd done their homework thoroughly. The kind that suggests your new CEO has been making major strategic decisions while failing to disclose a material personal matter that, according to Section 7.3 of the governance policies this board ratified in 2019, requires immediate ethics review and recusal from decision-making authority. The murmurs grew louder. Board members were flipping through their own copies of corporate documents, searching for Section 7.3. Ethan's confident posture finally cracked. His shoulders tensed. His grip on the presentation remote tightened until his knuckles whitened. You can't be serious. I'm extremely serious. Lena's voice remained calm, measured, devastating in its precision. In fact, I'd like to formally request an opportunity to address this board. Not as your wife, Ethan. Not as someone with hurt feelings. But as a founding member of this company who has documentation proving that multiple governance policies have been violated in the past 2 weeks. She looked around the room at the board members, the executives, the legal counsel who are now frantically taking notes. I believe everyone here deserves to understand exactly what's been happening while you were applauding the new CEO. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, Seattle stretched below them. The water, the mountains, the vast expanse that had seemed so triumphant just minutes ago. But inside this boardroom, the view had changed completely. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his growth projections still frozen on the screen behind him, his carefully planned presentation abandoned. For the first time since he'd filed those divorce papers, he looked uncertain. And Lena, seated calmly along the wall with her evidence organized in front of her, finally allowed herself the smallest flicker of satisfaction. The masterclass had begun. Lena stood, her portfolio in hand, and walked to the opposite end of the conference table, not challenging Ethan's physical position exactly, but creating a visual balance that hadn't existed moments before. Two ends of the table. Two founding members. Equal footing. May I? She gestured to the presentation screen. David Chin nodded slowly. I think we'd all like to hear what you have to say. Ethan remained frozen at his end, his jaw clenched tight enough to shatter teeth. Lena connected her laptop to the display. The first document appeared on screen. The original shareholder agreement from their Series C funding round in 2019. The one she'd spent 2 weeks negotiating. The one Ethan had signed without reading thoroughly. This is our governance structure, Lena began, her voice steady and clear. Specifically, Article 12, Section 3. Most companies vest CEO authority completely in a single executive. We didn't. At Meridian Ventures' insistence, and my recommendation, we built in conditional protections. She highlighted a paragraph. Several board members leaned forward, reading. The CEO maintains full operational authority provided they remain in compliance with established governance policies and ethical standards. In the event of material policy violations, the board retains the right to immediate review and temporary suspension of unilateral decision-making privileges pending investigation. That's standard corporate governance, Ethan said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Every company has similar language. True, Lena agreed. But most CEOs don't violate multiple governance policies within their first 2 weeks. She clicked to the next slide. Section 7.3 requires disclosure of material personal matters within 30 days. You filed for divorce 17 days ago. You informed the board when. Silence. During that undisclosed period, you approved a major restructuring, hired 3 executives, initiated acquisition discussions, and authorized expenditures totaling $4.2 million. Lena's presentation showed a timeline, each decision documented with dates and dollar amounts. Every single one of these decisions required full board vote, according to our bylaws, for any executive operating under undisclosed material circumstances. Susan Park was already pulling up documents on her tablet. Jesus, Ethan, this is basic governance. It's also fraud, Robert Mitchell added quietly. His background was in corporate law, and his expression had gone from interested to alarmed. Misrepresenting your authority to make binding decisions exposes the company to liability. Ethan's face had drained of color. I was acting in the company's best interest. We needed to move fast in a competitive market. Under undisclosed personal circumstances that directly affect operational stability, Lena interrupted. She wasn't raising her voice, didn't need to. The facts spoke loudly enough. But that's not even the primary issue. She clicked to the next slide, the patent filing for their core recommendation engine. This is our flagship product's foundational technology. It generates $40 million annually. The patent lists Ethan Cole as sole inventor. She paused. But the technical specifications, the actual innovation that makes it work, were developed by me. Section 9.1 of our IP protections requires written consent from original developers before removing attribution. I never gave that consent. David Chin's expression had shifted from interest to serious concern. How much of our IP has potentially compromised attribution? Approximately 60% of our patent portfolio has similar issues. Lena displayed a spreadsheet. I've documented every instance where original authorship was misrepresented without proper consent procedures. The legal counsel was frantically typing. One of them looked up at Ethan. Did you verify IP attribution procedures during any of these filings? Ethan's silence was answer enough. There's more, Lena continued. She pulled up an investor deck from 2020. This presentation to Wellington Capital promised both founders would remain actively involved in strategic decisions through 2025. They invested $8 million based partially on that assurance. She clicked to her email records. I was systematically excluded from strategy meetings starting March 2024. 14 months of misrepresentation to investors about founder involvement. The room had gone deadly quiet except for the sound of board members frantically reviewing documents. "You planned this," Ethan said suddenly, his voice cracking with something between disbelief and rage. "You've been waiting for the perfect moment to destroy everything we built." Lena turned to face him fully. The morning light from those floor-to-ceiling windows backlit her, and for the first time in 17 days, she felt completely in control of her own story. "No, Ethan, I didn't plan this. I survived this." Her voice remained calm, but it carried through the boardroom like a verdict. "You told me you'd outgrown our marriage, that you needed someone who fit your new image. But you didn't outgrow me. You underestimated me." She gestured to the screen, full of evidence. "Every governance policy you violated, I wrote it. Every protection you triggered, I built it. Every piece of IP you tried to erase my name from, I created it. You spent 8 years watching me work and somehow convinced yourself I was just your supportive wife. You forgot I was also your equal." Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. David Chun cleared his throat. "I think we need to call a vote. This evidence requires immediate action." "Agreed," Susan Park said. "I move that we suspend Ethan Cole's unilateral decision-making authority pending a full ethics review and audit of all decisions made since a CEO appointment." "Seconded," Robert Mitchell added. "This is absurd," Ethan managed. "You're going to let a bitter ex-wife destroy this company because this has nothing to do with your marriage." David Chun cut him off. "This is about corporate governance and fiduciary responsibility. All in favor of the suspension." 7 hands rose. Not a single abstention. "Motion carries," Chun said. "Ethan, until the ethics review is complete, all major strategic decisions require full board approval. Your authority as CEO is temporarily suspended." The view outside the windows hadn't changed. The bay still sparkled. The mountains still stood eternal. But inside this boardroom, everything had shifted irreversibly. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his presentation abandoned, his power stripped, his carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. And Lena, at the opposite end, felt the weight of 17 days lift from her shoulders. Not revenge, not victory, something quieter and more profound. Justice. The boardroom emptied slowly. Board members lingered in hushed conversations with legal counsel. Executive team members exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that the leadership structure they'd celebrated 2 weeks ago was now under investigation. Ethan gathered his materials with mechanical precision, his movements stiff and controlled. He didn't look at Lena as he passed her on his way to the door. Didn't speak. The man who'd commanded this room an hour ago now moved through it like a ghost, already erased from the narrative he'd spent weeks building. The door closed behind him with the same soft click it had opened with, but the sound carried a different weight now. Final. Irreversible. Lena stood at the window, watching Seattle stretch out below. The city looked exactly as it had when she'd entered this building 3 hours ago, but everything felt different. Lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying weight she'd forgotten to notice until it was finally gone. David Chin approached, his expression somewhere between impressed and unsettled. "That was the most thorough governance presentation I've seen in 20 years of venture capital." "I had a good teacher," Lena said quietly. "You. The Meridian due diligence team in 2019 taught me what institutional investors actually care about." He smiled slightly. "We should talk about your role going forward." "I'm not trying to take his place," Lena said immediately. "I know, but the company needs your expertise. Officially this time." Chen handed her his card. "Call me next week. Let's discuss options that don't involve courtrooms." After he left, Lena remained at the window. Her phone buzzed with notifications. News traveled fast in Seattle's tech community. Already, the narrative was shifting. The same journalists who'd praised Ethan's ascension 2 weeks ago were now writing very different stories. Governance crisis at Cole Technologies. TechCrunch posted 14 minutes ago. CEO authority suspended amid ethics review. Seattle Times Business posted 9 minutes ago. The articles didn't know the full story yet. They didn't know about the divorce papers, or the kitchen confrontation, or the systematic erasure of her contributions. But they would. Eventually, the complete picture would emerge. Not from Lena, though. She wouldn't need to tell her side. The documentation spoke for itself. Her phone rang. "Rachel Chun, I'm watching the news," her attorney said without preamble. "I assume this means we're renegotiating the divorce settlement." "Yes," Lena said, "but not for revenge. I want fair, actual fair, not his version of fair." "Define that for me." Lena thought about the house they'd bought together, the company they'd built together, the life they'd shared before ambition had consumed whatever love had existed. 50-50 split of assets acquired during marriage. My name restored on the IP I developed. A formal acknowledgement of my founding contributions in any future company materials. And his signature on the papers by the original 90-day deadline, he said. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "That's remarkably reasonable given what you could demand right now." "I don't want to destroy him," Lena said, surprising herself with how true that was. "I just want what I earned, what I built, what was always mine. I'll draft the revised terms. With his current situation, I doubt his attorneys will fight it." After the call ended, Lena finally left the boardroom. The elevator ride down 42 floors felt longer than usual. Time to think. Time to process. Time to recognize that the woman who'd entered this building this morning wasn't quite the same woman leaving it. The parking garage was quiet. She sat in her car, the Volvo she'd been generously allowed to keep in the original settlement, and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back during the presentation. Not triumph, not satisfaction, something quieter and more profound. Relief, the kind that comes from finally being seen after years of being overlooked. From proving your worth to people who'd forgotten you had any. From reclaiming your own story after someone else had tried to write you out of it. Her phone lit up with a text from Maya, her former assistant. "Everyone's talking about what happened. They're asking who Lena Cole really is. I told them you're the person who built half this company and got zero credit. Time for that to change." Lena smiled. Time for that to change indeed. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. 50-50 split. Restored IP attribution. Formal acknowledgement of her founding role. Everything on her terms. Ethan signed the papers at his attorney's office. They never spoke again. The ethics investigation concluded that while no fraud had occurred, multiple governance violations warranted a restructured leadership model. Ethan remained CEO, but with significantly reduced unilateral authority and mandatory board oversight on all major decisions. The company survived. Thrived even. Turned out having proper governance and honest attribution didn't hurt growth after all. Lena took a consulting role, advising the board on technology strategy. Not full-time, not all-consuming, just enough to remind everyone, including herself, that she'd always been essential. She kept the Kirkland condo. Turned out she liked the quiet. On her first day back in the office officially, someone asked her how it felt to have finally gotten justice. Lena thought about that question carefully. About the 17 days between the kitchen table confrontation and the boardroom revelation. About every late night she'd spent building something with someone who'd forgotten to see her as an equal. About the moment Ethan had said he'd outgrown their marriage, not realizing he'd never grown enough to understand what he was losing. "It doesn't feel like justice," she said finally. "It feels like I finally stopped waiting for someone else to give me permission to be who I always was." Here's what most people never understand about power. It's not taken. It's recognized. Ethan Cole built his empire on arrogance. He assumed his title made him untouchable. He assumed his position proved his worth. He assumed the woman he'd underestimated for 8 years would simply fade away when he decided she no longer fit his image. He was wrong on every count. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the one making the most noise. It's the one you've stopped noticing, the one you've dismissed, the one you assume is powerless simply because they're not demanding to be seen. Lena didn't destroy Ethan. She simply reminded everyone, including him, that the foundation he'd been standing on was never his alone. And when you build something on someone else's work while erasing their name from the blueprints, you shouldn't be surprised when the whole structure becomes unstable. Power built on arrogance collapses the fastest. Remember that. If this story resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been underestimated. Someone who's been told they're not enough. Someone who's been systematically erased from their own story. Like this video. Subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to stay silent. And drop a comment telling me, what would you have done in Lena's position? Because the best revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming undeniable.